midst of criticism, persecution, and outright animosity, the early church was born. And not only was it born, but it thrived. And followers of what people refer to as the Way spread like wildfire throughout the world. The early church was distinct and different from the world around it, and that distinction turned the ancient world on its head. But now, it's probably safe to say that today, the majority of us who call ourselves Christians are not exactly known for being distinct and different from the world around us, but rather, we just kind of blend in. As Christians, our identity ends up getting attached to a denomination or a nationality or a political party. So what was it that made the early church so different? What was it that made them so, well, distinctively Christian?
Well, welcome everybody. My name is Ken and I am the Prescott Valley campus pastor. So I want to give a big hello to all of you in PV joining us out there on Panther Path. And to those of you who are online whenever and wherever you're watching, thanks for doing so. And then come join us in person, whether it's at our Prescott Valley campus or right here in Prescott. Thank you all for joining us. And even those of you in the nosebleeds up top, thanks for dropping by today. Hey, before we get into the message, I want to invite those of you who are new to Quad City, I'd say since Christmas. If this is, you've been coming here since about Christmas, we have an event for you. It's next Sunday in the afternoon from 3 to 6, where it's the Newcomer Vision Gathering. And this is an opportunity for you to meet the guy that's up here yelling at you almost every Sunday, Jason. You get to meet him, know him a little bit. He'll get to know you a bit, hear your story, and he wants to take the time to tell you where we've been as a church, the history, where we are, and where we're going. And it's also a great opportunity for you to get to meet people that are new to the church community and make some relationships. One of the big functions of the church is to help people have relationships with those who are trying to follow Jesus. And we need one another to help us follow Jesus a little closer today than we did yesterday. So we're going to serve dinner and we're going to have childcare. So registration is vital. You can get it on the QR code there, or at either campus, go out to Connection Central and they can get you signed up. But if you're new, since I'd say Christmas, come join us for this. You'll be glad you did. So back to our regularly scheduled programming. Let's get to today's topic, distinctively Christian. We're taking a look at what made those the first few centuries of Christians so distinct from the culture around them, so distinct from the Roman Empire. But before we get into the topic today, we're going to rewind the clock. So 2,000 years prior to those early Christians, I want to share with you a story from the book of Genesis that's relevant to the topic today, and then I'll tell you the topic. And this account that I'm going to read from Genesis, it goes back to the first people of the nation of Israel. There's no nation yet. There isn't even a tribe. It's just two people, Abram and Sarai. You also might know them as Abraham and Sarah. And Abram is the first of those patriarchs. And the backstory here is that by the time Abram turned 75, he and Sarai have had no children, which is not great in that kind of culture. And so God appears to Abram when he's 75 years old and he says, you're going to be a dad. And not only are you going to be a father, but your children and your descendants will be like the star, as numerous as the stars in the sky, the sands in the seashore, and all the world will be blessed because of your descendants, which is an incredible promise. So God makes him that promise, and 10 years go by, and there is still no baby. Right? Sarai has not conceived, so they take matters into their own hands to try to make this promise come true. And let's pick that up in Genesis chapter 16. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, but she had had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, the Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her. Abram agreed to what Sarai said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarai, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. He slept with Hagar, and she conceived. Plan worked. She's going to have a baby. Sarai's going to claim it as her own, right? We're going to have a baby. Now, our tendency is to cleanse this story and make it a little more palatable for our church ears, but I want to look at this from her perspective. Okay, at this point, Abram is like 85-ish years old. Hagar is of childbearing age. So at the most, she might be 45, and I think that's highly unlikely. I'd say her ceiling is closer to 35, and she might be as young as 15 years old. So there is a 50 to 70-year age gap between the two of them. Her circumstances are not great, to say the least. She is a slave. She has no say in the matter. And now she's a womb slave. You're going to bear this child for my wife or for her. And so when a woman is forced, obligated to have physical, intimate relations with someone, and she has no say in the matter, there's a word we use for that. What word do we use for that? That's right, rape. So to put it mildly, Hagar finds herself in less than ideal circumstances surrounding her pregnancy. It's a pregnancy that she did not choose. And then it gets worse. Sarai gets jealous because she's pregnant. The plan worked, and now she's envious and jealous. So she complains to Abram, and he's no help. He does not speak up for Hagar, which tells you something, right? Gave her husband to be her wife. I mean, this seems a little more like window dressing to me. It's not really his wife that he cares for. It's his wife that now I can have relations with her. He doesn't speak up for her. He says, she's your slave. Do as you want. So what does Sarai do? She mistreats Hagar. What does Hagar do? What do many slaves do when they're mistreated or abused? She flees from her master. And when she flees, in her flight into the desert, she encounters the angel of the Lord. When they have a conversation, she tells the angel, I'm on the run. She tells him the story. And his response is, go back. Submit to your mistress. And this is where we resume the story in verse 11. The angel of the Lord also said to her, not only does he want you to go back, he's like, you're now pregnant, and you will give birth to a son. You shall name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard of your misery. Ishmael means that God hears. And what did he hear? That she was miserable. And why wouldn't she be miserable? We'd all be miserable, I think, in this circumstance. Her response is simply amazing. She gave this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the God who sees me. For she said, I have now seen the one who sees me. How very personal and intimate. God sees me. And I share this story not because it relates to the early Christians, but because it relates to some of you personally, or it relates to someone you know and love. This story relates to the woman who has found herself pregnant and did not want to be. The woman who has found herself in less than ideal circumstances and under great duress to be with child. Some of you might be in this situation now and you don't know what to do. Or maybe years ago you were in this situation and you made a decision that gave you great relief then and brings you great regret now. Well, I want you to know that just like God saw Hagar, God sees you. He has seen you in your turmoil, or your misery, or your regret, or your relief. He sees you, and he cares for you, and so do we. And I share this story because I don't want to lose you throughout the sermon. I want you to know that you are loved and cared for by God and by people, because today I am advocating for a position of the early church. A church that was unashamed and unabashedly and counterculturally pro-life. And so as you hear this message and as I advocate for the unborn, know that the mother who chose abortion is just as important as the child who was lost. And if you are in Christ, you have been forgiven. You need to hear that. You have been forgiven if you are in Christ. And so if you're thinking, Ken, why does this matter? Isn't the church still pro-life? Isn't it because of the church and the pro-life movement that the Roe ruling was overturned 2 years ago? Why are you talking about this? We're talking about this because I believe the survey data. I don't think that the Pew Research Center is wrong. In 2022, they did a survey of the general population, and then they break it out by, gender, all kinds of categories. Well, the category of white evangelical Protestants, which is most of our church, this is what they found as it relates to abortion amongst that community, which is our community. This is what they found. That 72% of respondents thinks there are some cases where abortion should be legal, which is a tacit nod and approval of moral, and others where it should not. It's a bit of a mixed bag. Some should be legal, some cases it should not. Furthermore, this number gets bigger because the survey also revealed that 5% of Christians are like it across the board, abortion should be legal. So up to 77% of Christians agree with this in one form or another. The survey also found that only 21% of self-professed followers of Jesus said abortion should be illegal in all circumstances. 77 and 21 does not equal 100. That is for people who didn't respond or rounding. This is why we're talking about it today. Because if this result is indicative of our church, and most surveys are indicative of the general population, that means that there's about 900 adults between Prescott and the Prescott Valley campus that agree with this and think this way. And that was not the position of the early church. It does not compute with the example, with the ministry, or with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And it begs the question, why are we not distinct in this area? Like, if they were pro-life, why aren't we? Well, I think it's because we have absorbed much of the pro-life advertisement, the positions. We've heard them for so long, we've absorbed them. We've heard and come to agree with things like, it's just a clump of cells. Or it's my body, it's my choice. Or we hear things and believe that this should be a decision between a woman and her doctor. During the Clinton years, they rang the bell for abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. Or if you don't want an abortion, then don't have one. Or we accept the idea of being personally pro-life, but we wouldn't take take away someone else's choice. Don't let the government intervene. And we have been hearing this since at least the 1970s. And I at once held positions very similar. And it all changed over the course of walking with Jesus. The fact of the matter is that we have been influenced to a greater degree by the culture rather than by the Christ. We are more disciples of the culture than the Christ. We are not distinct in this area like the early followers of Jesus. So if you fall into this percentage, my ask for you today, as you listen to this, is to consider the position of the early church and why you should adopt this position as well. And for those of you who this isn't going to affect you, you are beyond your childbearing years, why am I even sitting here? Maybe someone you love, a child or a grandchild, is going to be in a tight spot. They're going to be in a situation where they're considering abortion, and they may confide in you. You need to be able to give them a Christ-centered way of looking at this. That's part of discipleship. That's part of following Jesus. Look through the eyes of Christ. So please hear me out today and take on the eyes of Jesus. And let me assure you what I'm not going to do today. I am not going to get tribal. Jason used that analogy last week. We get tribal in our corners. I'm not going to paint the picture that anyone who has made the choice to terminate a pregnancy or advocates for the pro-choice position, I'm not going to advocate that they are monsters, because that is simply not true. But nor will I entertain the idea that those on the pro-life side are simply trying to control a woman's body. And what I'm also not going to do is I'm not going to avoid saying things that are unpopular or hard and that will probably hurt. So if any of my words hurt, please remember this proverb, that wounds from a friend can be trusted, but an enemy multiplies kisses. Now, granted, I am not a friend to all of you, but please know that I do care, and I am speaking to you as a friend, as one who cares. And we all need to remember that no one in this debate is your enemy. No matter which side you lean on, none of these people are your enemy. No matter, our struggle is just simply, it's not against each other. We've got to fill our head and our heart with the words of Paul to the church in Ephesus when he said, our struggle is not against flesh and blood. It is not against people, but it is against the rulers, against the authorities, the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Our struggle is not against each other. It is not against the woman who chose abortion, nor against the doctor who performed it. And don't blow this off. Despite the packaging, despite the marketing, despite the fact that abortion is accepted across the culture, it is a product of evil forces in the spiritual and heavenly realms. Keep it front and center that both sides of this debate, the pro-choice and the pro-life debate, are concerned with real people in real circumstances with real hopes and real dreams and are facing real challenges. So I want to zoom out a little bit and look at the big picture. We do not want to demonize people who are caught up in a difficult situation or demonize people who feel they're acting in the best interest of someone else. Both groups have animating values that drive them. For instance, on the pro-choice side, they are having compassion for the mother, right, for her life, her needs, her future. They're advocating for her. And on the pro-life side, they're advocating for the child. They are advocating and having compassion for the unborn, her life, her needs, his future. On the pro-choice side, they want to make sure that the voice of the one who literally and figuratively carries the entire weight of the pregnancy and early childhood, that her voice does not get taken out of this debate. The pro-life side wants to give voice to the one who does not have a voice, the child himself. And giving voice to the voiceless is a primary reason to be pro-life. As a matter of fact, the book of Proverbs holds that characteristic up of what a king should do. A king should give voice to the voiceless. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Who is more unable to speak for themselves than an unborn child? If the child had a say in the matter, what do you think he would say? How would she respond to the question of, hey, should you live or should you die? Okay, with the big picture, here's what we know about abortion. It's been around for over 5,000 years. The earliest record goes back to the Egyptians, 3500 BC, and it had been culturally acceptable until the followers of Jesus stepped in. And how do we know it was culturally acceptable? I'm going to give you some examples. This first one comes from a letter, and it's written by a man named Hilarion, we don't know who he is, to his wife Alice. And he is away, he's in the city of Alexandria away from his family, and he's working. We don't know what kind of work he does. But like many people who immigrate to another city or another country, earn money, send it back home to support their family, that's what he's doing. She is pregnant, and they have a child already. And look at the words that he uses and how he expresses affection for her. And they're concerned. He's concerned for his wife. She's concerned for him. And here's how it goes. Know that we are still in Alexandria. Do not be anxious. If they really go home, I will remain in Alexandria. I beg and entreat you, take care of the little one. And as soon as we receive our pay, I will send it up to you. If by chance you bear a child, meaning if you deliver, right, not if you just happen to have a kid, if you bear a child, if it is a boy, let it be. If it is a girl, cast it out. And you see this, he's filled with compassion for his wife. And he is ready to be a dad to a boy, but not to a girl. And cast her out is a way to describe infant exposure, which was a method which would be similar to abortion today, and I'll explain in a moment. But the child would be literally tossed into a trash heap, either to be devoured by animals, left to die from exposure, taken in and raised as a slave, or rescued by the Christians. And we hear this and we're like, I would never do that. But do you realize what exposure is? It is selective abortion. And this our culture does. This our culture condones. We look in an ultrasound or genetic test, and there's something that is undesirable about this child. It's a girl, not a boy. And so in our culture, the baby is aborted in the womb rather than left out to die. The timing might be different. The methodology might be different, but the result is the same. A child is killed. And they had methods of abortion pre-exposure. It would either be herbal inducements to labor to force a miscarriage, or vigorous labor to bring you into labor before that child could be viable. So they had abortion and they had exposure. In our setting, it's all the same. So this is an example of cultural acceptability, and that people who chose this then are just like people who choose it today. We are a mixed bag of competing priorities and demands on our life. So that's the culture. An example of the Christian distinctiveness is in a first century document called A Letter to Dionysius. And it describes the early Christian. It is not written by a Christian. It is from a Christian to a non-Christian talking about the Christians. And I'm not going to share with you the whole letter. I'm just going to give you 2 lines. And yet there is something extraordinary. So beyond what is culturally acceptable, there's something about these people. And he lists a whole bunch. There is something extraordinary about their lives. Like others, they marry and have children, but they do not expose them. The Christians do not practice infanticide. It's just something they don't do. They don't do what is ordinary or condoned or acceptable. They live above and beyond. And not only did they not participate, as I mentioned before, they rescued children who were exposed and raised them as their own, laying down their lives for a complete stranger. Okay, so those are examples of Christian distinctiveness from the culture and the critic. Now I'm going to give you an example of Christian opposition to abortion by the Christians. It's from a book called the Didache, which is a first century document, so just like much of the New Testament. And it's a basic manual on Christian conduct. And I must tell you, the words and the language that they use are very pointed, very direct, and very uncomfortable. This is from chapter 2 and chapter 5 of the Didache. This is the expectation of Christians in the first century. You shall not murder a child by abortion, nor kill that which is born. So no exposure and no in utero. And those who do so are judged murderers of children, destroyers of the handiwork of God. So I wanted to make it very clear, if you are in Christ and this is part of your story, you are forgiven. Keep that in your head. You are forgiven. You are forgiven. These are very strong words that we don't like to use, but they did not mince words. And so those are examples from then, but what about now? What about this? What about those who are in this category? What's interesting about this statistic, this 72%, is some should be legal and some should not. A mixed bag of competing priorities and competing values. And I understand the competition among the things, but I think part of it is because of what we know, what's happening in the womb in early gestation. We know that within hours of conception, brand new DNA appears. It's not mom's, it's not dad's. It is a wholly unique set of genetic code that from that moment contains every piece of information related to that child. What color eyes, how tall, personality characteristics, size of their feet, he or she. It's all in the DNA, and it appears within hours, before the zygote even attaches to the uterine wall. It's not even in the womb yet. A separate genetic code that is all its own. This is not part of the mom. It is a separate and distinct human being. This is not her body. This is somebody else. Every new life begins at conception. It is an irrefutable fact of biology, which means when it comes to abortion, no matter what the circumstances surrounding the conception, no matter how short or how far along in the pregnancy, no matter the physical condition of the baby in the womb, abortion always ends the life of an individual human being. It is the execution of a person every time. And over the next 8 weeks, it sure looks more and more like a person, right? At 8 weeks, every organ is present and in place. 90% of the structures found in an adult human being can be found in this tiny life, which is an inch and a half long. Measurable brain waves, baby sucks their thumb, the kidneys are cleaning fluids, the liver is producing its own blood cells, and at 8 weeks, these babies will recoil from pain. You put a needle in there for a test, amniocentesis, or you put an instrument or a vacuum in there to abort at 8 weeks, this child will recoil from the fear and pain. There's no denying it. We are talking about a human being. It is a person. And these are simply biological facts that have nothing to do with our belief in God or our view of God. And none of the early Christians knew any of this information. Yet, they abhorred abortion. And because we know all this to be true, we get these should, some situations yes, some not. We recoil at the idea of an elective abortion that is based in convenience. But I ask you, what abortion is not based in convenience? Under what cases should it be legal or should it not? Should abortion be legal in cases of rape or incest, which is anywhere between 0.5% to 1.5% of all cases, which that may be a small number of abortions, but it is of monumental significance to the victim, to the mother. Like it's everything. It means something to be in that small percentage. And I do not want to diminish your pain in the least if that's anyone here or listening. But remember Hagar, you are seen and cared about by God. But we do not make the child pay for the sins of the father, and we do not multiply the trauma to the victim. That would be unjust. Did you know that among us, in our church, is someone who was conceived as a result of rape? And after the last sermon, someone came and told me, now you got 2, my 9-year-old. This person is married, has children, has a rich, full life, and is known to many of you. Should this person, or now I know these people, or should they not have had the right to life because of the conditions of conception? What do the conditions of conception have to do with the unborn child? Why should the child be killed for the crime of another? We would never stand for that under any other circumstances. Should killing a child be moral if a fetal abnormality is detected or if the child has a deformity? We have at least 2 girls in our church who are wonderful, encouraging, joyful, giving young ladies who are missing an appendage. And I asked the mom, I said, what would your family be like without them? Here's some of the answers. There would be less inspiration, less joy, less freckles, fewer jokes, less compassion. Just the other day, she said, Mom, all I want to do is save all the abused animals and kids in the world. To which Mom replied, man, life would lack so much color without her. So because someone is missing fingers, toes, limbs, they don't get to become this person and experience life? They don't get to be life givers to others? What about a prenatal screen that showed Down syndrome? It is quite common to abort a child with Downs. Thanks to prenatal screening, over the last 10 years, the number of children born with Downs in the United States has been cut by 1/3. In Europe, it's down by 1/2. And in Iceland, almost 100% of women with a positive Down test elect to terminate. Our advanced technology is not eliminating Down syndrome. It is eliminating people with Down syndrome. And in our midst is a middle-aged man with Downs. And in talking to his mother, here's what she said about him. Without him, I would not know the true meaning of patience and understanding. I have softened because of William, and so many others' lives would not be the same. He has touched thousands of lives over the years with his love and grace. I don't think I'd have the compassion for others that I have today. And as stressful as it can be, I can't even imagine life without him. He loves unconditionally, is kind and compassionate, extends love and mercy, incredibly forgiving of my faults, and happy. If everyone in the world had downs, our world would be a completely different place. This is the type of person Iceland has virtually eliminated. William is the type of person who falls into this category of sometimes legal. The world has seen, and anyone who has read a history book knows the atrocities that occur when we devalue a human being because he or she falls outside of an acceptable norm. We've read about it when it comes to the transatlantic slave trade. Sure, they're human, but they're not people. They're slaves. They're property. I've bought them, and I shall do as I please. My grandparents, who are still alive today at 91 years old, were alive as our government marched indigenous people off to God-forsaken real estate, slaughtered them by the thousands, and violated every treaty we ever signed with them because they weren't people. They were savages. Jews aren't people. They're apes and pigs. So let's round them up on rail cars and ship them off to concentration camps to starve and work until they die. And if they're too old or too young to work, exterminate them. We are appalled at these things. Yet all these things are the result of a human being being devalued or called something other than a person. And why is an unborn child any less a person in any of those examples? They are not. They are just as valuable and just as deserving of protection as anyone else, regardless of the circumstances surrounding their conception or the condition of their developing body in the womb or the location of their body in the womb. It is still a person, a human being. So I implore you, stop buying the lies that come from the spiritual forces of evil. And the Christians didn't know this. The first century Christians knew none of that. Why were they pro-life? It's something they saw in Jesus. It was something in his teaching, something in his example. And I'm going to give you two examples which should impact us in how we view this. The first example is when a man comes to Jesus and he says, "What is the greatest commandment in the law?" To which Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it," meaning equally important. Not that it's similar, it is just as important as the first. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and prophets hang on these two commandments. You will not find a book, chapter, verse in the Bible that says abortion is wrong. It doesn't need to be, because everything written in there hangs on those two commandments. Love your neighbor as yourself. Nothing is as important. So, if you have an accident, you cut off a few fingers, like a child born without a few fingers, it's detected with no fingers. Are you going to kill yourself? If someone brutally assaults your mother, are you going to kill yourself? If you sustained a traumatic brain injury that made you joyful and kind to everyone around you, would you kill yourself? Absolutely not. They're ridiculous questions. An unborn child is your neighbor. Love that child as you would love yourself. Second example is Jesus at the Last Supper. He's with the 12, his last meal with them, and here's what he says. "My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. And we can all get behind this, right? We love this. Oh, love each other? Certainly. Jesus served, I can serve. I can wash feet, I can wash your car, I'll babysit your kids. I can serve the people. He taught them, I can teach you the Bible, I can teach you about Jesus. He corrected them, let me help fix some of your thinking. I can do all that, we can get behind it. But Jesus didn't stop there. He keeps talking, and it gets to the cost for us. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. And he describes it. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is the cost of discipleship, to lay down our lives. Based on this text, verse 13, this is like a summary statement of the entire gospel. You could state the gospel this way. The gospel is, I will lay down my life for your benefit. That is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Abortion says, I will lay down your life for my benefit. Abortion is the anti-gospel. It is completely opposite of what Jesus taught, modeled, expected, and called us to do. So if you're going to move out of that 72 to 77% of people, of Christians, who think it's okay, who values one type of child over the other, who says that this kind of child can live but not this one, this child can be protected by the force of law but not that one, if you're going to move out of that camp, you have got to see people the way that Jesus does. You need to cleanse your mind from the discipleship of the culture and immerse yourself in the teaching and expectation of Jesus. We have to lay down our life. And it is not enough to just think like Christ and the early Christians on this issue. We need to live like them too. The early Christians took in those infants that were exposed. You too can do the same thing. A mother chooses life but can't raise the baby, you can adopt the baby. Or you can help the families who have done that. Just as the early Christians did that, just as the early Christians advocated for the unborn in the public sphere, you too can do that. And don't kid yourself. Just because Roe was overturned does not mean abortion has gone away or will go away. It's, in some cases, in some states, it's only expanded. So vote your faith. Vote your conscience. Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves. Love your neighbor as yourself by laying down your life for their benefit. God, I pray for your mercy, for your forgiveness for us who have thought and operated like the world, that we have absorbed the culture more than the Christ. Thank you that you're merciful. And God, I pray for all the people anywhere and everywhere that this is part of their story, that they can experience your grace and forgiveness. And I pray that as a people here in Prescott and Prescott Valley and the Quad Cities, that we would reflect the values of Jesus, that we would think and live differently because we get to be distinctively Christian. Thank you for Jesus. Amen.